The wedding dress tore with a sound like a scream. Not the delicate, expensive lace of the bodice, but the heavy satin of the skirt, caught on the jagged edge of a broken fence post as I ran. The sound was swallowed by the howling wind and the distant, growing thunder of pursuit. My breath sawed in my lungs, raw and too loud. The scent of pine and cold earth was overpowered by the coppery tang of my own fear, and beneath it, something else, something wild, musky, and terrifyingly close. Run, Josie, just run. My name was a desperate prayer in my own mind. Josie Miller, almost Josie Hudson. The thought was a fresh bolt of panic, propelling my legs faster even as they burned. The pristine white heels had been discarded miles back, my bare feet now torn and numb against the frozen forest floor. The veil was long gone, snatched by a greedy branch. I was a ghost in tattered white, fleeing through the midnight pines of the Blackwood territory on what was supposed to be my wedding night. Little did I know, the ceremony was the easy part. A guttural snarl ripped through the trees to my left, too close. The undergrowth exploded. Not a wolf, not yet, but Hudson, my fiancé, his eyes reflecting a sliver of moon with an animalistic gleam. His tuxedo jacket was gone. His shirt ripped across a chest that seemed broader, more powerful than it had been at the altar just hours ago. "You can't outrun me, sweetheart," he called, his voice a dark melody that used to make me shiver with desire. Now it just made me shiver. "It's done. The papers are signed. You're mine." "I didn't sign anything," I screamed back, veering right, towards the rushing sound of water, the river. If I could reach the river, the scent trail might break. "Your father did." Hudson's laughter was a cruel thing. "Traded you for a truce, a pretty little peace offering to end the border skirmishes. You didn't think he'd let you marry for love, did you?" His words were physical blows. They explained the rushed engagement, my father's unusual silence, the way Hudson's pack, the Frostfang Pack, had suddenly become so welcoming. I was a business transaction, a sacrificial lamb in satin. That was my first mistake, believing I had a choice. A root snagged my ankle. I went down hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I rolled, scrambling to get up, but a shadow fell over me. Hudson stood there, breathing lightly as if he'd been on a stroll. His canines seemed longer. "Time to come home, Luna," he purred, the title a mockery. "I am not your Luna," I spat, pushing myself up on trembling arms. "You are whatever I say you are." He took a step forward, and the air around him shimmered. A low, crackling sound, like popcorn magnified 100 times, filled the clearing. His body contorted, bones realigning with sickening crunches. Fur, dark as pitch, sprouted from his skin, which stretched and tore only to heal instantly beneath. The horror of it was absolute, a visceral assault on my senses. This wasn't the romanticized change from storybooks. This was a violent, painful rebirth into a monster. In seconds, a massive black wolf stood where Hudson had been, saliva dripping from jaws that could sever my head in one bite. Its eyes, still Hudson's eyes, locked onto mine with possessive fury. This was it. This was how I died. Not at the altar, but in the mud, in the ruins of a wedding dress. The wolf lunged. I squeezed my eyes shut. A roar, deeper and more earth-shaking than any sound I'd ever heard, answered. It wasn't a sound of anger. It was a sound of authority. A golden-brown blur shot from the trees on my right, colliding with the black wolf in midair. The impact was like two cars crashing. Snarls, the rip of fur and flesh, the violent shake of powerful bodies. It was a whirlwind of primal violence. I crawled backwards, my heart hammering against my ribs so fiercely I thought they'd crack. The golden wolf, larger, its fur tipped with silver like frost, gained the upper paw, pinning the black wolf with a crushing weight to its throat. A whimper escaped Hudson. The golden wolf didn't kill him. It just held him there, a low, continuous growl vibrating the very ground beneath me. Then it shifted. The transformation was just as brutal, just as loud, but there was a terrifying grace to it. Where Hudson's change was rage, this was power, controlled and lethal. Bones snapped back, fur receded, and where the massive wolf had been, a man now knelt, one hand still pinning the black wolf's neck. He was naked, his body carved from marble and scarred from battle. Steam rose from his skin in the cold air. He turned his head, and his gaze found me. The world stopped. It wasn't just that he was breathtakingly handsome, all sharp angles and stormy eyes. It was a pull, a physical, wrenching sensation deep in my core, as if a hook had been embedded there at birth and he now held the line. My breath hitched. My skin flushed hot, then cold. A silent, resonant click echoed in my soul, a lock I never knew existed turning open. Mate. The word came from a place older than thought. His eyes, a piercing blue-gray like a winter sky, widened infinitesimally. The same shock, the same recognition, flashed across his features before they hardened into an unreadable mask. "Stephen," Hudson's wolf whined, the sound distorted. "Alpha, this is pack business." Stephen, the alpha of the Blackwood pack, our sworn enemies, the man my father's treaty was meant to appease. Stephen's voice, when he spoke, was gravel and velvet, a rumble that I felt in my teeth. "Your pack business is bleeding onto my land, Hudson." He applied more pressure, and Hudson's wolf went still. "Chasing a female, in a wedding dress." His eyes never left mine, scanning my torn dress, my bleeding feet, my terrified face. "Explain." "She's my wife," Hudson growled. "I'm not." The denial burst from me, fueled by that strange, defiant energy thrumming between Stephen and me. "He's lying. The ceremony, it wasn't finished." I ran. Stephen's gaze intensified, searching my face. "Your name?" "Josie." It was a whisper, a confession. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. I saw the exact moment he caught my scent, pure, untainted human scent, laced with fear and adrenaline. And something else, something that made his pupils dilate. His jaw tightened. "She carries no mating mark," Stephen stated, his voice dropping lower. "She smells of fear, not of you. She is on my land." He finally looked down at Hudson. "By the laws that even your pack honors, she is under my protection until her true status is determined." "Not yours. You can't do this," Hudson struggled. "Our alphas have an agreement." "Your alpha made an agreement with a human," Stephen said, standing up in one fluid motion. He was utterly unself-conscious in his nudity, a king in his domain. "He did not disclose he was offering a stolen bride. The treaty is void." He turned his back on Hudson, a breathtaking display of dominance, and walked toward me. Every step sent a new jolt through my system. The pull became a roar. My body yearned to move toward him, to kneel, to offer my throat. My mind screamed in terror. He stopped a foot away, the heat from his body a tangible force. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. A scar cut through his left brow. The scent of him, pine, snow, and pure, untamed power, wrapped around me. "Can you walk, Josie?" he asked. His tone was not gentle, but it wasn't cruel. It was assessing. I shook my head, my voice gone. Without another word, he bent and scooped me into his arms. I gasped at the contact. His skin was searing hot against my cold, bare arms. The sensation was electric, terrifying, and deeply, profoundly right. I stiffened, every instinct in conflict. "Don't touch her!" Hudson shrieked, shifting back to human form in a ragged, painful-looking spasm. He knelt in the dirt, naked and furious. "She's mine." Stephen didn't even glance back. "Follow, and I'll let my betas finish what I started." He spoke into the darkness. "Christopher, escort our Frostfang guest to the border." See, he remembers the way. From the shadows, a tall, lean man with serious eyes and a quiet presence materialized. He gave a short, sharp nod. Alpha! So this was Christopher. His voice was calm, methodical, devoid of unnecessary inflection. As Stephen carried me away, Hudson's screams of rage followed us. This isn't over, Blackwood. She was paid for. You're stealing Pack property. Pack property. The words echoed in my hollow chest. Stephen carried me as if I weighed nothing, his stride eating up the ground. I was rigid in his arms, caught between the instinct to cling to him and the instinct to fight free. Why, I managed to choke out. Why are you doing this? He looked down at me, his expression inscrutable. You were screaming in my head from 5 miles away. Before I could process that, we broke through the tree line. A sprawling, rustic lodge made of dark timber and stone rose before us, lights glowing warmly in the windows. The Blackwood Pack house, the heart of enemy territory. The front door flew open. A stunning woman with a cascade of auburn hair and a fierce expression stood silhouetted in the light. She took in the scene, her alpha, naked, holding a torn, bloody woman in a wedding dress, and her emerald eyes flashed with something volatile. Stephen. Her voice was sharp, cultured, but with an underlying heat. What is the meaning of this? Who is this human? Victoria, Stephen said, his tone leaving no room for question. Prepare the guest room and fetch the healer. Victoria's eyes narrowed, raking over me with palpable disdain. You bring a Frostfang whore into our home, on the night of their alpha's wedding. She is not his, Stephen said, and the possessiveness in those 3 words vibrated through me. She is a guest. Now do as I command. Victoria flinched as if struck. She shot me a look of pure, undiluted venom before spinning on her heel and disappearing inside. Stephen carried me across the threshold. The interior was all warm wood, animal pelts, and the smell of wood smoke and pack, a dense, complex aroma of many wolves. Faces appeared in doorways, on the staircase, curious, hostile, shocked. Whispers hissed through the hall like snakes. Human. Smells like fear. Wedding dress is that frost. Stephen ignored them all, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He shouldered open a door to a simple, clean room with a large bed and a roaring fire. He laid me on the soft furs with a surprising lack of roughness. The healer will see to your wounds, he said, standing back. The distance felt like a loss. You will stay here. Am I a prisoner? My voice was small. His winter sky eyes held mine. You are in the eye of a storm, Josie, until I determine what you are and why the bond. He cut himself off, clenching his jaw. Until I determine the truth, you are under my protection. And my watch. He turned to leave. The bond, I whispered. He paused at the door, his broad back tense. Rest. What happens now? I called out, desperation rising. He half turned, his profile harsh in the firelight. Now, he said, his voice a low promise that was both a threat and a dark comfort, your wedding night is over, and your real life begins, whether you want it or not. He closed the door. I heard the distinct, final sound of a heavy lock engaging from the outside. I was alone, shaking, covered in mud and blood and the lingering, intoxicating scent of the alpha who claimed to feel me screaming in his head. What happened next would change everything. Because as I sat there in the silent, locked room, a new heat began to bloom in my veins, not from the fire, but from deep within. A restless, aching, unfamiliar power. And on the nightstand, reflected in the dark window glass, my eyes for a fleeting second glowed a faint, unmistakable gold. Little did I know, the man who captured me was only the beginning. The real monster was the one waking up inside me. The gold faded from my vision, leaving only the stark, terrifying reality. Stephen's arms were a cage of heat and muscle around me, his scent, pine and winter air and something deeply, fundamentally right, filling my lungs. My feet screamed where they dangled, raw and torn from my desperate flight through the Blackwood forest. I was carried by the alpha who had shattered my wedding, claimed me as his own, and whose very touch sent a confusing, electric current of solace through my terror. What happens now? The thought was a frantic drumbeat in time with my heart. The world moved in a blur of dark timber and stone. The air shifted from the damp, pine-scented chill of the forest to the dry, smoky warmth of indoors. I heard the heavy thud of a door closing, the distant crackle of a large fire, the low murmur of voices that instantly cut off. We were inside the Blackwood pack house. Stephen didn't put me down. He moved through what seemed like a great room, vaulted ceilings, massive beams, the scent of wood smoke and leather, and up a wide staircase. His silence was absolute, a pressurized force. I dared a glance upward. His jaw was set, his profile harsh in the shadowy light from wrought iron sconces. The conflict I'd seen in the forest was still there, a storm behind his eyes. He shouldered open a heavy door at the end of a hallway and carried me into a room. It was spacious, dominated by a large bed with a dark wood frame. A fireplace held glowing embers, and furs were scattered on the polished floor. It was masculine, clean, and felt intensely his. Finally, with a gentleness that contradicted everything about him, he placed me on the edge of the bed. The softness of the comforter was a shock against my battered soles. I flinched, a small gasp escaping me. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice a low rumble. He turned and left the room, closing the door behind him. I heard the distinct, final sound of a key turning in a lock. A cage. A prettier cage. Panic, fresh and sharp, clawed up my throat. I was alone, trapped in the den of the wolf. The reaction set in. My body began to shake uncontrollably. The adrenaline that had fueled my run, the shock of the confrontation, the bizarre golden flash in my vision, it all crashed down. I hugged myself, staring at the locked door. My thoughts were a whirlwind. Hudson's furious face, my father's calm betrayal, Stephen's piercing blue eyes seeing straight into me, that pull. A sound made me freeze, footsteps returning. Not just his. The door unlocked and opened. Stephen entered, followed by an older woman with kind eyes and a severe-looking man carrying a leather bag. Stephen's presence immediately filled the space, his gaze sweeping over me, assessing. "This is Mara, our healer," Stephen said, his tone leaving no room for question. "And Dr. Evans, they will see to your injuries." Mara offered a small, reassuring smile. "Let's have a look at those feet, dear." I recoiled, pulling my filthy, blood-caked feet under the hem of the ruined wedding dress. The dress. A symbol of the life I'd just escaped, and now a banner of my new captivity. "I'm fine." "You're not," Stephen stated, a thread of alpha command weaving through the words. It wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was an undeniable truth that settled over my will, softening its edges. "You will let them help you." The consequence of defiance felt too heavy. Exhausted, I slowly extended my legs. Mara knelt, her touch professional and gentle. She hissed softly at the sight. "Pine needles, rocks, deep lacerations. You ran through hell, child." Dr. Evans opened his bag, preparing supplies. "We'll need to clean and suture. There will be scarring." As they worked, the sting of antiseptic and the sharp prick of the needle were distant things. I focused on Stephen. He didn't leave. He stood by the fireplace, a silent, watchful sentinel, his arms crossed. His eyes never left the process, and whenever I winced, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The dress is in the way," Mara said softly, trying to push the torn lace and satin up my calf. Before I could react, Stephen moved. In 2 strides, he was at the bed. He didn't ask. His hands, large and capable, found the top of the dress's torn sleeve. With a firm, precise motion, he ripped the delicate fabric straight down the side seam. The sound was violent, final. I gasped, clutching the remnants to my chest. "It's a relic of a lie," he said, his voice gravel. He tossed the ruined sleeve into the fire. The synthetic material caught, flaring briefly with a foul smell before crumbling to ash. "You won't need it." He proceeded to rip the other sleeve, then the skirt, tearing away the layers of tulle and satin until I was left in just the stained silk slip. I sat there, exposed and shivering, not from cold, but from the sheer, brutal symbolism of the act. He was erasing Hudson's claim, physically stripping it away. My face burned with a humiliated flush. Mara and Dr. Evans kept their eyes diligently on their work, but the tension in the room was a living thing. "Why?" The words scraped out of my throat, barely a whisper. Stephen's blue eyes locked onto mine. "You know why." "I don't. I'm human, you said it yourself, a stray human." "You started a war over a stray." My voice rose, edged with hysteria. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the bed on either side of me, caging me in. Mara and the doctor wisely focused intently on my feet. Stephen's scent enveloped me, that confusing, calming, terrifying scent. "You felt it in the clearing," he said, his voice for my ears only. A low, intimate growl laced the words. "The second I saw you, smelled you, that snap. Don't lie to me, Josie Miller, and don't lie to yourself." I wanted to deny it, to scream that I felt nothing but fear. But the memory was a physical brand. The world narrowing to him, the frantic beat of my heart shifting rhythm to match his, the insane, instinctive thought of mine that had echoed from some deep, unknown part of me. My silence was my confession. He saw it. He straightened, a satisfied, grim tilt to his mouth. "Finish up," he ordered the healer and walked back to his post by the fire. If only I had known then that the bond was just the beginning, and not the answer. The medical work was completed in a heavy silence. My feet were cleaned, stitched, and wrapped in soft bandages. Mara gave me a long, loose t-shirt and sweatpants that smelled faintly of Stephen, laundry detergent, and that underlying alpha scent. She helped me into them, her touch motherly. "She needs rest, Alpha," Mara said, packing her things. "And food, she's in shock." Stephen gave a single nod. "See to it." They left and the key turned in the lock again. But this time, Stephen remained. He walked to a side table and poured a glass of water from a pitcher, bringing it to me. "Drink." I took it, my fingers brushing his. A spark, warm and unsettling, shot up my arm. I drank greedily, not realizing how parched I was. "My father," I said, the glass trembling in my hand. "He made a deal with Hudson. What did you do to that deal?" Stephen's expression darkened. "I voided it. A treaty made under false pretenses, trading a person as chattel, is no treaty at all. Your father's business truce with Frostfang is forfeit. He'll be lucky if Hudson doesn't burn his warehouses to the ground." A hollow laugh escaped me. "So you've ruined him, too." "He ruined himself the moment he sold his daughter," Stephen said, no pity in his voice. "He used you as a shield, hoping Hudson's obsession with claiming you would deter him from their border disputes with my pack. A coward's move." The pieces clicked into a horrifying picture. My father hadn't just sold me for profit. He'd used me as a sacrificial pawn in a supernatural conflict I never knew existed. The betrayal cut deeper, leaving me numb. A firm knock sounded at the door. Without waiting, it opened. Christopher, the steady beta, entered with a tray of food. Steam rose from a bowl of stew, and there was fresh bread. His eyes flicked from me to Stephen, reporting silently. "Hudson is off our land," Christopher said. "He was vocal. He claims this is an act of war. He says the girl belongs to him by human and pack law." Stephen's aura of control didn't waver, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She belongs to no one. She is under my protection. That is the only law that matters here. The pack is uneasy, Christopher continued, his voice carefully neutral. They've heard rumors that you brought a Frostfang bride into the heart of our home. Then I will address them, Stephen said. His gaze landed on me, possessive and resolved. Tonight. My stomach churned. Address them. About me, I was to be a spectacle again. Christopher left and Stephen pointed to the tray. Eat. I was starving. The savory smell of the stew broke through my dread. I ate under his watchful eye, the simple food tasting like a lifeline. When I was done, he took the tray and set it aside. Come here, he said, standing by the fireplace. I can't walk, I said, gesturing to my bandaged feet. In answer, he simply walked over, bent, and lifted me into his arms again. He carried me to a large armchair by the hearth and sat, settling me on his lap as if I were a child. I stiffened, every muscle locking in protest. Relax, he murmured, his chest vibrating against my back. One arm secured around my waist, holding me firmly against him. The other hand came up, his fingers slowly, deliberately, combing through the tangled mess of my hair. The action was so unexpectedly tender, so at odds with the man who ripped dresses and started wars, that a broken sob caught in my throat. Why are you doing this? I whispered, tears finally spilling over. You don't know me, I'm a problem, a human problem. His nose brushed against the side of my neck, just below my ear. He inhaled deeply, a rumble building in his chest. A purr, a wolf's purr of contentment. You are my mate, he said, as if stating the color of the sky. The bond doesn't care about species or treaties or weddings. It just is. My wolf recognized you the moment you stumbled into my territory. It's undeniable. But I'm not a wolf, I cried. He stilled, his fingers pausing in my hair. Are you so sure? The question hung in the air, charged and terrifying, my golden flash vision. The strange, heightened awareness of him. The way my senses had sharpened in the forest during my panic. Before I could form a denial, the door burst open. It wasn't locked this time. Victoria stood in the doorway, her beautiful face a mask of fury and hurt. She took in the scene, me curled on Stephen's lap, his arms around me, the intimate proximity by the fire. Her scent, something sharp like citrus and bitterness, flooded the room. Stephen, she said, her voice trembling with barely leashed emotion. The pack is assembled. They're waiting for you. Her eyes, blazing with accusation, sliced to me. And you bring it in here to your private rooms, after what her kind just cost us. Stephen's hold on me tightened, not painfully, but definitively. Watch your tone, Victoria. Josie is under my protection. She is not it. Victoria took a step forward, defiance in every line of her body. Protection? She's a liability, a human doll traded between packs. Her father is a snake, her intended is our enemy, and you've just declared war for her. What is she besides pretty and pathetic? The air pressure in the room spiked. Stephen's dominance rolled out, a palpable wave of force that made my ears pop. Victoria flinched but held her ground. She is my mate. The 3 words landed like physical blows. Victoria staggered back as if struck. All the color drained from her face. Her eyes widened, darting between us, searching for a lie, finding only brutal truth in Stephen's unwavering gaze. No, she breathed. That's impossible. She's human. The bond, it wouldn't. It did, Stephen said, his voice final. The moon goddess's will is not for us to question. You will show her respect as you would show me. Is that clear, Beta? The title was a reminder, a reassertion of rank. Victoria's jaw worked. She looked at me, and the hatred there was so pure, so venomous, it stole my breath. This was more than pack politics. This was personal. Clear, Alpha, she forced out, the words tasting like ash. She spun on her heel and stormed out, leaving the door gaping open. The consequence of his declaration was immediate. My head swam. Mate. He kept saying it, making it real, making it a chain around us both. Stephen stood, lifting me with him. It's time. Time for what? I asked, dread a cold stone in my gut. To meet the pack, he said, carrying me toward the door. To show them what you are, to make them understand. I don't want to, I struggled weakly, panic returning in a flood. He stopped at the threshold, looking down at me. In his blue eyes, I saw the conflict again, but beneath it, a terrifying certainty. This is not a choice, Josie. Not for you and not for me. The bond demands it. Survival demands it. If the pack sees you as a weakness, they will reject you. And an alpha cannot keep a rejected mate. Do you understand? I understood. This was my trial, not by forest, but by pack. He carried me down the hallway, toward the staircase. The low murmur of dozens of voices grew louder from below. The sound was a growling, restless ocean. As we reached the top of the stairs, the great room came into view. It was filled with people. Dozens of them all turned to look up at us. Men and women, all powerful, all watching with wary, curious, or hostile eyes. The air was thick with the scent of wolf and suspicion. Christopher stood at the foot of the stairs, a solid, calm presence. Victoria was to the side, her arms crossed, her expression a thundercloud. Stephen descended the stairs, every step measured and dominant, with me in his arms, a symbol of vulnerability and claim. The crowd parted, silence falling heavy and complete. All I could hear was the crackle of the massive central fireplace and the frantic rabbit beat of my own heart. He reached the center of the room and turned, facing his pack. His voice, when he spoke, was a deep, carrying alpha tone that vibrated in my bones. Packmates, he began. You have heard rumors, you see what I hold. This is Josie Miller. She was to be Hudson of Frostfang's bride, a piece in a coward's treaty. A low growl rippled through the crowd. I intervened, Stephen continued, his arm tightening around me. Not for politics, not for territory. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I intervened because the moon goddess herself placed her in my path. I intervened because she is mine. A collective intake of breath. Whispers erupted, sharp and disbelieving. A human! A male voice called out from the back, bold with challenge. Stephen's gaze snapped to the speaker. Do you question the bond? Do you question the will of our goddess? The man lowered his eyes, submitting. But Victoria stepped forward, her voice clear and cutting. We question the timing, Alpha. We question the source. She comes from our enemy, covered in another Alpha's scent. How do we know this isn't a trick, a spell? How do we know she isn't a spy, sent to weaken you with a false bond? Murmurs of agreement followed. The tension coiled, ready to snap. Stephen looked down at me, his eyes holding mine. In them I saw a command, a plea, trust me. Then he did something I could never have predicted. He lowered his head to the crook of my neck, where my pulse hammered against my skin. His breath was hot. And then his teeth grazed the sensitive spot where my shoulder met my neck. Not a bite, but a deliberate, primal press of canine. A bolt of pure, white-hot sensation shot through me. It wasn't pain. It was a claiming, a connection, a circuit completing. A low, involuntary sound escaped my lips. My head fell back against his shoulder, my eyes fluttering shut. And deep inside, in a place I never knew existed, something stirred. A ripple of power, faint but unmistakable, emanated from me, from us. Gasps filled the room. The pack felt it. The truth of the bond made manifest in that shared energy. Stephen lifted his head, his eyes blazing with blue fire. Do you feel it now? He roared to his pack. Do you feel the truth? The pack was silent, stunned. The challenge in the air began to dissolve into awe and confusion. But in that moment of profound vulnerability, as the pack's resistance wavered, a new sound pierced the quiet. From outside, far away but carrying clearly on the night wind, came the long, haunting howl of a wolf. It was not one of theirs. It was a cry of rage, of promise, of war. Then another joined it, and another. A chorus of hostile howls rose from the edge of the Blackwood forest, painting the night with a sound as cold as the grave. Hudson was back, and he wasn't alone. Stephen's head snapped up, his body coiling like a spring. Every wolf in the room turned toward the sound, their eyes flashing in the firelight. The consequence of his claim was here, not in pack politics, but in teeth and claws at the door. He looked down at me, our faces inches apart in the suddenly charged silence broken only by the distant, gathering howls. "The war," he said, his voice grim and final, "starts tonight." The howls from the forest didn't fade. They multiplied, a chorus of savage promise that sliced through the stunned silence of the great room. War. Hudson wasn't just at the border. He was here. The energy in the room, so recently bent to Stephen's will, shattered into 100 different impulses. Growls erupted from the assembled pack. Chairs scraped stone as warriors shot to their feet, their eyes flashing amber and silver. The scent of pine and aggression became a thick, choking fog. Josie flinched, the sound a physical blow against her already frayed nerves. Stephen's arm around her didn't loosen. It became a steel band, pulling her tighter against his side. His own growl, low and authoritative, vibrated through her bones. "Silence," he commanded, and the room obeyed, but the tension was a live wire sparking. His gaze swept over his pack, a general assessing his troops. "Christopher, status." Beta Christopher, who had been moving toward the main doors, stopped. His head was tilted, ears attuned to sounds beyond human or newly changed hearing. "A full war party, at least 20 strong. They're at the eastern tree line, just past the boundary stones. They're not crossing yet. They're waiting." "For what?" Victoria snapped, her venom now redirected from Josie to the external threat. Her eyes glowed with fierce loyalty to the pack, if not to its newest member. Stephen's jaw tightened. "For a response, for a show of weakness." His eyes fell to Josie, barefoot, trembling, and clad only in his borrowed t-shirt. A liability, a prize, the cause. The conflict in his scent, protective fury versus strategic calculation, was a storm she could smell. "Victoria, with Christopher, secure the perimeter, full defensive shift. No one crosses our line, but no one provokes a full engagement without my direct order." They moved without question, 2 blurs of motion followed by a stream of other warriors, flowing out of the great room and into the deepening twilight. The howls outside had settled into a menacing, intermittent series of calls, a predatory taunt. The remaining pack members, elders, adolescents, those not frontline fighters, stared at Josie with a new, more dangerous suspicion. She was the spark, the treaty breaker, the human who had brought Frostfang to their doorstep. "The rest of you to your posts. Guard the house, the children's wing, the southern ridge." Stephen's voice allowed no argument. As the room cleared with a low rumble of discontent and fear, he finally looked down at her. His expression was unreadable, carved from granite. "You can't stay here." Before she could process his words, he bent and scooped her up again. Her protest died in her throat as he carried her not toward the doors leading outside, but back through the shadowed hallway toward his private quarters. The sounds of the pack mobilizing echoed around them. Snarls, the thud of heavy footfalls, the distant creak of heavy shutters being secured. "Where are you taking me?" she managed, her voice small. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't smell you." His answer was curt, his focus already split between the woman in his arms and the battle brewing in his woods. He shouldered open the door to his bedroom. The remnants of her wedding dress were still a sad, shredded heap in the corner. Mara, the healer, was there, hastily packing her medical kit. She looked up, her kind face etched with worry. "Alpha, the perimeter. I know. Finish with her. Now." He placed Josie on the bed with a surprising care that contradicted the urgency in his tone. Mara didn't hesitate. She quickly checked the bandages on Josie's feet. "The bleeding has stopped. The pain will be significant, but you must not put weight on them. The scarring will be considerable." She said it with a gentle apology. "I've left salve and fresh wrappings here." She indicated a small basket on the nightstand. With a final, pitying glance at Josie, she hurried from the room. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone. The distant, haunting howls were muffled here, but they were a constant, dreadful underscore. Stephen paced to the window, peering out into the gathering dark. His broad back was rigid. Josie pulled the t-shirt down over her knees, a feeble attempt at modesty. The silence between them, punctuated by the external threat, was worse than his anger. "What happens now?" she whispered. He didn't turn. "Now Hudson tries to take back what he thinks is his, and I break him for daring to claim what is mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have chilled her. Instead, a treacherous, warm flicker ignited low in her belly. She hated it. He's a kidnapper, a stranger, a monster. But her body, her very blood, sang a different, terrifying song. "I'm not a thing to be taken," she said, finding a sliver of her old self, the one before the betrayal, before the running. Finally, he turned. His eyes were pure, molten silver. "Aren't you?" He took a step toward the bed. "Your father traded you. Hudson bought you. And the moon, in her infinite chaos, decided you belong here with me. Your opinion, Josie Miller, has never been part of the equation." The harsh truth of it was a slap. "But I am not them," he continued, his voice dropping. "I did not pay for you. I did not trick you. I recognized you. And that changes everything." He knelt before the bed, his gaze level with hers. The proximity was overwhelming. His scent, cold winter air, iron, and something deeply, uniquely Stephen filled her lungs. She couldn't look away. "What is happening to me?" The question tore from her, raw and honest. "My eyes in the forest and in the great room. I felt something, a heat. It came from you." He studied her face, his own conflict visible. "The mate bond isn't just a feeling, Josie. It's a living energy, a tether. It can manifest in different ways, especially under stress, or when an alpha asserts his claim publicly." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek, not touching. "You are latent. There is wolf in your blood, buried deep, perhaps from a distant ancestor. The bond is waking it up. Your eyes glow with my power because you are mine." The explanation was too much. Werewolf genetics, latent traits. It was the stuff of the dark fairy tales her father had dismissed. Yet it was the only thing that explained the impossible pull, the golden fire in her veins when Stephen was near. "I don't want it," she breathed, but the denial was weak. "It doesn't matter what you want," he said, not unkindly, but with a fatalistic certainty that made her shiver. "The bond it exists, and Hudson knows it. He felt its echo in the clearing. That's why he's here with his entire pack. He's not just losing a treaty bride. He's losing a true mate to his rival. It's the ultimate humiliation. And he will burn my territory to the ground to erase it." A particularly close series of howls erupted, followed by the deep, answering bellows of the Blackwood sentries. Stephen's head snapped up, his body coiling. The moment of quiet confession was over. "I have to go. They are my pack. This is my land to defend." He stood abruptly. He moved to a heavy oak wardrobe, pulling out a thick, black cable-knit sweater. "Put this on. The t-shirt is insufficient." He tossed it to her, then went to the stone fireplace. To her astonishment, he pressed a seemingly random stone. With a soft grind, a section of the wall beside the hearth swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. Cold, damp air sighed out. "What is that?" Josie asked, clutching the sweater. "A bolt hole, an old escape route from when this territory was more volatile." He strode back to her, his demeanor all business. "You will go in, you will follow the passage. It slopes down and ends in a fortified root cellar beneath the old kitchen garden. It's stocked. You will stay there, silent, until I or Christopher come for you. No one else. Do you understand?" The command was absolute. The thought of being alone in a dark, underground hole was paralyzing. "No, please, don't put me in the dark." "It's not a request." He leaned down, his hands on either side of her on the bed, caging her in. His intensity was a physical force. "If Hudson gets past our lines, his first goal will be to find you. To kill you just to spite me. To remove the stain on his honor. The cellar is the one place his nose cannot find you. The earth and stone will mask your scent. You will be safe." Safe, the word was a mockery. But the alternative, Hudson's cruel hands, his promise of a lifetime of subjugation. The dark passage seemed the lesser evil. Numbly, she pulled the heavy sweater over her head. It drowned her, smelling overwhelmingly of him. Stephen didn't wait for further agreement. He lifted her again, carrying her to the open maw of the passage. The darkness within was absolute. He took a flashlight from a shelf inside the entrance and pressed it into her hand. "Go straight. Do not deviate. I will find you when this is over." He placed her on her feet just inside the passage. The cold stone beneath her bandaged soles was agony, and she cried out, swaying. He caught her, a low curse rumbling in his chest. For a heartbeat, he held her upright, her body pressed against the hard planes of his armor. His face was inches from hers. His breath fanned her lips. The bond between them screamed, a live wire of need and fear and fury. If only she had known that this fleeting touch would be the last moment of fragile connection before the world shattered. A thunderous crash echoed from the front of the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood and a chorus of enraged roars. The attack had begun in earnest. Stephen's eyes flared. "Go!" he ordered, shoving her gently but firmly into the darkness. "Now, Josie." He stepped back. The heavy stone door began to swing shut, cutting off the light from the room, his formidable silhouette, and the sounds of the burgeoning battle. The last thing she saw was the silver glow of his eyes, fixed on her. Then, with a final solid thud, she was entombed. Panic, immediate and suffocating, clawed at her throat. She fumbled with the flashlight, her hands shaking. The beam clicked on, a frail, yellow wand cutting through the oppressive black. The passage was narrow, hewn from raw earth and rock, supported by ancient, sweat-darkened timbers. It smelled of damp soil and old roots. Trembling, she took a step, a hiss of pain escaping her. She had no choice. She shuffled forward, the beam bouncing ahead of her. The sounds of the pack house were gone, replaced by a silence so deep she could hear the frantic drum of her own heart. The passage did indeed slope downward, the air growing cooler. She lost track of time, measured only in painful steps and the ragged sound of her breathing. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a descent into a primal nightmare. Her mind replayed the last hour on a loop. Stephen's declaration, the pack hostility, the chilling howls, the terrifying tenderness in his touch as he caught her. What happened next changed everything, though she wouldn't understand until it was far too late. The tunnel finally ended at a rough wooden door. She pushed it open, the beam of her flashlight revealing a small, circular cellar. Stone shelves lined the walls, holding jars of preserves, bottles of water, and blankets. It was clean, but it was a prison. She hobbled to a stack of blankets in the corner and sank down, pulling them around her. The sweater and blankets carried Stephen's scent, a maddening comfort in the terrifying isolation. She sat in the dark, listening. At first, nothing. Then a faint, distant thump that vibrated through the earth. Then another, a muffled roar. The battle was raging above her. Time became meaningless. She dozed fitfully, haunted by dreams of silver and amber eyes, of her father signing a contract, of Hudson's laugh. She was jolted awake by a new sound, not from above, from the tunnel. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, not the swift, sure tread of Stephen or Christopher. These were cautious, slightly dragging. Her blood turned to ice. She scrambled back, pressing herself into the corner, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The beam was weak now, the battery dying. The wooden door creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted in the darkness of the tunnel. Not Stephen, too slender. The faint light from the dying flashlight caught a fall of dark hair, a familiar, contemptuous curve of the lips. Victoria. She stepped into the cellar, her eyes reflecting a faint, cold green in the gloom. She held a large, wicked-looking hunting knife loosely at her side. Her clothes were torn, and a long, bleeding scratch marred her cheek. She smelled of blood, sweat, and pine. "Hello, little human," Victoria said, her voice a silken poison. "Or should I say, little latent, hiding in the dark while our pack fights and dies for you." Josie's mouth was desert dry. Stephen said, "Only him or Christopher." Victoria let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Stephen is occupied. Hudson is a more determined foe than we anticipated. He's pushing hard on the eastern flank. Stephen is holding the line." She took a step closer. "It's a shame, really, all this chaos for a broken, useless thing." "What do you want?" Josie whispered, her grip tightening on the flashlight. "What I've always wanted, the good of the pack." Victoria's gaze was pitiless. "You are a fracture, a weakness. The bond may be real, but it's a mistake. It will get him killed. It will get us killed. A true alpha's mate should be strong, a warrior, not a crippled human, with a traitor for a father." She took another step. The knife gleamed. "Hudson wants you dead. Stephen, in his madness, wants you alive. The only solution that brings peace is if you disappear. A tragedy of war, lost in the confusion, no body to recover. Hudson's honor is avenged, Stephen's madness is cured, and the pack survives." The true horror of her meaning crashed over Josie. "Stephen will know, the bond. Will scream in agony as you die, and then it will fade," Victoria interrupted, her voice chillingly matter-of-fact. "It will break him for a time, but broken men can be rebuilt. Better a broken alpha than a dead one, and a dead pack." She raised the knife. "This is a mercy, Josie, for everyone." Josie stared into the beta's ruthless eyes and saw her death. There was no escape. Her feet were shredded. The tunnel was behind Victoria. She was cornered. But as the fear peaked, that strange, golden heat erupted in her core again. It was stronger now, a surge of pure, desperate energy. Her vision tinged with gold. She felt it, a distant, fraying thread of connection stretched taut with battle fury. Stephen. "He will kill you for this," Josie said, and her voice didn't sound like her own. It held a resonance, an echo of that power. Victoria hesitated for a fraction of a second, sensing the change. Then her lips peeled back in a snarl. "He'll never know." She lunged. Josie threw up her arms, a futile shield. The dying flashlight clattered to the stone floor, its beam spinning wildly, casting monstrous, leaping shadows. But the killing blow never landed. A roar, not of battle, but of pure, unadulterated rage, shook the very stones of the cellar. It was a sound of soul-deep violation, of a bond screaming in terror. The wooden door exploded inward, shattered into splinters. Framed in the wreckage, coated in blood and grime, eyes blazing with a feral, apocalyptic silver light, was Stephen. And he was not alone. The roar that tore from Stephen's throat was not entirely human. It was the sound of the earth cracking open, of a mountain coming down. It shook the dust from the cellar's stone ceiling. Victoria froze, her claws a hair's breadth from Josie's throat, her head whipping toward the source of the fury that flooded the small space. If only I had known then that his rage was the least terrifying part of him. He filled the doorway, a silhouette backlit by the dim tunnel light, heaving for breath. The coppery scent of blood, not his own, Josie realized with a jolt, clung to him like a second skin. It was smeared across his chest, his arms, painting dark streaks on his skin. His eyes were pure, blazing amber, fixed on Victoria with a promise of annihilation. "You dare!" The words were a low, vibrating growl, each syllable sharp enough to draw blood. Victoria scrambled back from Josie, her defiance crumbling into instant, primal fear. "Alpha, you touched what is mine." Stephen took a step into the cellar. The air pressure seemed to drop, becoming thick and hard to breathe. Josie could only stare, her own terror momentarily eclipsed by the sheer, raw power radiating from him. "You disobeyed a direct order. You sought to kill my mate." "She's a weakness," Victoria shrieked, finding a desperate thread of her earlier conviction. "The Frostfangs are at our walls because of her. I was saving the pack, saving you." Stephen didn't even seem to hear her. His gaze flicked to Josie, a lightning-fast assessment. The molten fury in his eyes didn't soften, but it shifted, focusing. "Are you hurt?" Josie's mouth was desert dry. She managed a tiny shake of her head, her hands pressed against the cold stone floor, pushing herself weakly into a sitting position. The movement sent a fresh throb through her bandaged feet. That small sign of pain was all it took. Stephen moved. It was a blur of motion and sound. A snarl, a rush of displaced air, a sickening thud. One moment Victoria was standing. The next she was slammed against the far wall, Stephen's hand wrapped around her throat, her feet dangling inches off the ground. The impact echoed in the confined space. "The only threat to this pack," Stephen hissed, his face inches from hers, "is the traitor in its midst." Victoria choked, her hands clawing at his immovable wrist. "Stephen, please, decades of loyalty." "Loyalty." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper Josie could still hear with painful clarity. "Loyalty ends where the mate bond begins. You know the law, you know the price." Josie watched, horror and a shocking, shameful sense of vindication warring inside her. This was for her. This terrifying, brutal display was because Victoria had tried to hurt her. The bond in her chest, that frantic, living thing, pulsed with a fierce, approving heat. It scared her how much she wanted him to protect her, even like this. What happened next changed everything. Stephen didn't kill her. He dropped her. Victoria crumpled to the floor, gasping, her neck already bruising. "Christopher!" Stephen bellowed, his voice carrying up the stone tunnel. Within seconds, the beta's form appeared in the doorway, his own clothing torn and speckled with evidence of the battle outside. His calm eyes took in the scene, Josie on the floor, a terrified Victoria, his Alpha bloodied and enraged, without a flicker of surprise. "Alpha, take her to the cells," Stephen commanded, his back to Victoria as if she were already irrelevant. "She is stripped of rank. She will face judgment when the border is secure." "Yes, Alpha." Christopher moved with efficient grace, hauling a sobbing Victoria to her feet. She offered no resistance, her spirit broken. As he led her away, her final, despairing look was not at Stephen, but at Josie. It was filled with a hatred, so pure it felt like a physical blow. Then they were gone. The sounds of their footsteps faded, leaving only the heavy, ragged sound of Stephen's breathing and the frantic drum of Josie's heart. The dominant, furious alpha posture seemed to drain from him all at once. His shoulders slumped slightly. He turned to her, the amber fire in his eyes receding, leaving behind a stormy, exhausted gray. He crossed the space and knelt before her, his movements now deliberate, careful. "Josie," he said her name like a man tasting water after a long drought. He reached for her and she flinched. He stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them. The blood on his knuckles was stark. A low, pained sound rumbled in his chest. It wasn't a growl, it was something else. "I won't hurt you," he said, the words rough. "I could never, the bond, it would destroy me." She believed him. That was the most terrifying part. She looked from his bloodied hands to his face, seeing the conflict there. The warrior who had just been fighting, the alpha who had just dispensed justice, and the man who was tied to her by something deeper than choice. "The battle is holding," he said. He didn't offer empty comfort. "Hudson is desperate. He's throwing everything at the eastern tree line. He knows you're here." His eyes scanned her again, and he finally let his hand fall, not touching her, but resting on his own knee. "The bond told me you were in danger. A sharp, cold pain right here." He tapped his sternum. "I left the line. Christopher can hold it, but not indefinitely. You left a battle for me." The concept was alien. Her father had traded her for a business deal. Hudson had wanted her as property. This was different. "You are my mate," he said, as if it explained everything. And in his world, it did. He finally reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His fingers, careful despite their strength, brushed a strand of hair from her damp cheek. A jolt, warm and electric, shot through her at the contact. "The bond is a tether. Your fear, your pain, it's a scream in my blood. I couldn't stay away if I wanted to." The sounds of distant conflict filtered down then. A faint, muffled roar, the snap of a distant gunshot, humans on Hudson's side. A chorus of howls that raised the hair on Josie's arms. The war was not over. It was waiting for him. Stephen heard it too. His head lifted, his eyes going distant, listening to something she couldn't perceive. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "We can't stay here. This bolt hole is compromised." Victoria knew of it. Others might. "Where?" Josie's voice was a whisper. "With me," he said, and it was not a request. He stood, then bent, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back before she could protest. "I can walk," she insisted weakly, even as her torn feet screamed at the very idea. "No," he said simply, lifting her against his chest. "You can't." He was warm, solid. The scent of pine, winter air, and blood enveloped her. She should have been repulsed. Instead, her body went limp, her head finding the hollow between his shoulder and neck as if it belonged there. The bond purred in satisfaction. She hated it. She clung to it. He carried her back up the narrow tunnel, his movements sure in the darkness. They emerged into his bedroom. The room was as they'd left it, but the large window now framed a scene of chaos in the distance. Flashes of light in the dark forest, moving shadows, plumes of smoke rising against the moonlit sky. Stephen didn't pause. He carried her out of the room, down the main hall of the pack house. It was deserted, but the evidence of the pack's rapid mobilization was everywhere. Overturned chairs, a discarded jacket, the heavy front doors standing slightly ajar, letting in the cold night air and the cacophony of battle. He turned not toward the front, but deeper into the lodge, through a kitchen, and out a back door into a sheltered, high-walled courtyard. A heavy, modified SUV with dark-tinted windows was parked there, engine already idling, a low, throaty rumble. Christopher emerged from the driver's side. He gave a short, sharp nod to Stephen. "Perimeter is buckling at the eastern spur, Alpha. They've broken through the first line of guards. They're pushing for the house. Stephen's arms tightened around Josie. The diversion. Ready, your route is clear, for now. Stephen nodded, moving to the back passenger door. Christopher opened it, and Stephen placed Josie gently on the soft leather seat. The moment he tried to pull away, a bolt of pure, irrational panic seized her. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist. "Don't leave." The words were out before she could stop them, born of sheer instinct. The bond, the residual terror from Victoria, the sounds of war, it all coalesced into a single, desperate need. Him. Stephen stared at her hand on his wrist, then at her face. His expression did something complicated, something tender and fierce all at once. "I'm not leaving you," he vowed. He climbed into the back seat beside her, pulling the door shut. "Christopher, now." Christopher slid into the driver's seat, and the SUV surged forward with a quiet, powerful lurch. They sped down a rough, private track that wound away from the Pack house, the trees closing in around them, muffling the sounds of battle. In the relative quiet of the moving vehicle, the reality of the situation crashed down on Josie. She was in a car with two werewolves, fleeing a war started over her, her body thrumming with a connection to a man who was both her savior and her captor. She started to shake, fine tremors that began deep in her bones. Stephen, watching her, shrugged out of his torn, bloodied shirt. Josie averted her eyes, but not before seeing the hard planes of his torso, the old scars, the new, shallow cuts from the night's fighting. He reached into a duffel bag on the floor, pulling out a clean, dark Henley and pulling it on. The mundane action was surreal. Then he pulled a thick, soft blanket from the bag and wrapped it around Josie's shoulders. His hands lingered, rubbing warmth into her arms through the fabric. "Where are we going?" she asked, her teeth beginning to chatter. "A safe place. A cabin deep in our territory, beyond the contested border." His voice was low, meant for her alone despite Christopher's presence up front. "We need to let the bond settle. You're shifting, Josie. It's not just your eyes. Your senses are heightening. Your emotions are tied to mine. It's unstable for both of us. In the middle of a war, that instability is a weapon Hudson can use." Shifting. The word was a cold dread in her stomach. The latent wolf in your bloodline is awakening because of the mate bond. It's why you could sense Victoria's malice. Why my pain is yours. It will keep happening, and it will get stronger. He looked out the window at the blur of dark trees. "My father always said a true mate bond is the greatest strength and the most profound vulnerability an alpha can have. I understand now." The SUV bounced over a rough patch of road. Josie winced, her feet throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Stephen's gaze dropped to her bandaged feet, now stained with dirt from the cellar. A deep frown etched his face. "The healer, Mara," Josie said suddenly, remembering the woman's kindness. "Victoria, is she the only one who?" Stephen understood. "No, the Pack is wary, confused. They saw their alpha claim a human from a rival pack on the eve of war. They don't feel the bond. They only see the consequence. But Victoria's actions were her own. Her ambition and her feelings for me twisted her loyalty." He said it bluntly, without ego. "The Pack will follow me. They will accept you in time because you are mine. But first we must survive the night." "And if we don't?" The question hung in the air. Stephen turned his head, his gray eyes capturing hers in the dim light from the dashboard. "Then we don't," he said simply. "But we will be together at the end. The bond ensures that." It was a stark, terrifying comfort. They drove in silence for another 20 minutes, the road becoming narrower, the forest older and denser. Finally, they turned onto an almost invisible track and emerged into a small clearing. A rustic but sturdy log cabin sat nestled against a rocky outcrop, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its chimney. Prepared as you ordered, Alpha, Christopher said, putting the vehicle in park. Supplies for a week. Perimeter alarms are active. Good, return to the line, hold them. I will contact you at dawn. Christopher nodded. There was no question, no hesitation. Yes, Alpha. Stephen helped Josie from the SUV, again carrying her as her feet touched the frozen ground and she cried out. He shouldered the duffel bag and carried her to the cabin door, pushing it open. It was one main room, a living space with a roaring fire, a small kitchenette, and a loft bedroom visible above. It was warm, clean, and isolated. He set her down on a large, plush sofa near the hearth and immediately knelt before her. We need to see to your feet, he said, his voice all practical command now. He fetched the duffel bag, pulling out a first aid kit and a basin. He filled the basin with warm water from the kitchen sink and brought it to her, placing it on the floor. Gently, he lifted her feet, one at a time, and began to unwrap the soiled bandages. His touch was clinical, expert, but infinitely careful. Josie watched his bowed head, the firelight playing in his dark hair as he worked. The warrior was gone. In his place was a man performing a task of necessary tenderness. When the last bandage came off, he hissed softly. The wounds were angry, the deep lacerations from her flight through the forest puffy and red. They would scar, as the doctor had said. This will sting, he warned, before carefully bathing her feet with the warm water. The sting was sharp, but the warmth was a relief. He patted them dry with a clean cloth, applied a salve that smelled of herbs and honey, and wrapped them in fresh, clean bandages. His large, capable hands cradling her foot, his total focus on the injury. It was more intimate than anything she had ever experienced. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in her eyes. She was so tired, so lost. A tear splashed onto the back of his hand. He looked up. In the firelight, his eyes were soft, the gray like morning fog. He didn't speak. He simply finished tying off the bandage, set her foot down with care, and then moved to sit beside her on the sofa. He didn't touch her, just offered his presence. Why are you being kind to me? The question burst from her, ragged and raw. You took me. You said yourself I'm a prisoner, a means to an end. So why this? Stephen was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. The sounds of the forest at night, the crackle of the fire, the sigh of the wind, filled the cabin. At first, he began slowly, I thought it was just the bond, a biological imperative, a prize taken from a rival, a way to break Hudson and his treaty in one move. He turned his head to look at her, his face open in a way she hadn't seen before. But when I saw you in that clearing, covered in mud and blood and defiance, when I scented you, it wasn't just the bond, Josie. It was you. It was the fear in your eyes that you refused to let become submission. It was the strength it took to run from a monster on torn feet. You are not a weakness. You are a survivor. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. And you are mine, not as property, as my other half. My true mate. I will be kind because the thought of your pain is a poison in my veins. I will protect you, even from myself, until you believe it. Josie's breath caught. His words unraveled something tight and frozen inside her chest. She leaned, almost imperceptibly, into his touch. The moment hung, fragile and warm in the firelight. A sharp, electronic bleep bleep bleep. Stephen was on his feet in an instant, his head cocked. It was a sound from the duffel bag. He strode over, pulled out a small, rugged-looking radio and raised it to his ear. Static crackled, then a voice, strained and urgent, broke through. Alpha, come in. Alpha, do you read? The line has fallen, they're through, they're pouring toward the house. Christopher is down, I repeat, Beta is down. We're being overrun. They're shouting her name, they're looking for the human. Alpha there. A burst of static, then a scream, cut off abruptly. The transmission died. The color drained from Stephen's face. He stood utterly still, the radio clutched in his white-knuckled hand. The firelight cast his expression in stark, horrified relief. Josie's heart stopped. Christopher is down. Stephen's eyes met hers across the room. The tender man from moments before was gone, replaced by an alpha whose world was collapsing in real time. The cabin, the safe haven, felt like a paper box about to be crushed. "They knew," Stephen whispered, the words hollow with dawning, terrible understanding. Hudson wasn't just attacking the border. He was a diversion. The radio crackled to life once more, but this time it was not the voice of a Blackwood warrior. It was a voice that dripped with triumphant venom, smooth and familiar, echoing faintly in the silent cabin. It was Hudson. "Hello, Stephen, enjoying your honeymoon? Don't bother running. We're not at the Pack house anymore." A low, cruel laugh. "We followed your scent. We're in the trees right outside. Send out my bride and I might let your pack live. Keep her, and I'll burn this forest down with you in it." Outside the cabin, in the surrounding blackness of the trees, a dozen pairs of eyes began to glow with predatory intent, reflecting the firelight from the windows. The safe place was a trap, and they were surrounded. The silence that followed Hudson's broadcast was worse than any roar. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. The crackling fire, once a comfort, now felt like a beacon. Stephen's body went rigid against Josie's, every muscle coiled. Surrounded, the word echoed in the hollow of her chest. She felt Stephen's heart hammering through his ribs, a frantic counterrhythm to her own. His arms tightened around her, not in comfort, but in preparation. "Listen to me," he breathed, his voice a bare whisper against her ear, stripped of all its alpha command. It was raw, urgent. "The bond, it's a tether. You can feel me. I need you to hold on to that no matter what you see. No matter what happens." Before she could answer, a new sound sliced through the quiet. The crunch of a deliberate footstep on frozen pine needles just beyond the cabin's timber wall. Then another. A slow, encircling cadence. Stephen moved. In one fluid motion, he rose, pulling Josie up with him and placing her behind his body, his back to the fire. His frame blocked the windows, the door. He was all that stood between her and the closing circle. "Hudson," Stephen's voice boomed, filling the small cabin, an alpha's challenge. "You want to fight. You face me, not her. This is between alphas." A low, humorless laugh filtered through the logs. It was Hudson, closer than she'd imagined. "But she is the fight, Stephen. She's the treaty you broke. The property you stole, I paid for her. I'll have what's mine." Josie's stomach lurched. Property, paid for. The words of her father now snarled in a werewolf's throat. She pressed her forehead against the solid heat of Stephen's back, a whimper trapped in her chest. The golden warmth inside her, the bond, flickered with a surge of protective fury that wasn't her own. It was his. "She was never yours," Stephen growled. "The moon doesn't recognize human contracts, only truth, and she is mine." What happened next changed everything. The front door didn't burst open. It disintegrated. Splintered wood exploded inward as a massive, tawny-furred wolf, Hudson in his beast form, crashed through the frame. At the same moment, the window to the left shattered, and another Frostfang warrior, in human form but with claws extended, vaulted inside. The cabin became a vortex of noise and motion. Stephen met Hudson's charge midair, the impact shaking the very foundations of the cabin. They were a blur of black and tawny fur, snarls ripping the air. The other warrior lunged for Josie. Instinct, primal and sharp, took over. She wasn't a fighter, but she was prey who refused to be caught. She ducked, scrambling backward, grabbing the iron poker from the hearth. It was heavy, clumsy. She swung it wildly as the warrior closed in, his eyes gleaming with predatory intent. "The human has teeth," he mocked, swatting the poker aside with a clawed hand. The force numbed her arm. He grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. A scream tore from her throat, not just fear, but a signal. "Stephen!" The black wolf, locked in a savage grapple with Hudson, whipped his head around. A roar of pure rage erupted from him. It was more than sound. It was a wave of palpable energy that made the Frostfang warrior flinch. In that split second of distraction, Stephen disengaged from Hudson with a brutal kick of his hind legs and launched himself across the room. He moved like shadow given purpose. His jaws closed on the warrior's arm, bone crunching. The man howled, releasing Josie. Stephen flung him bodily through the remains of the window. But the cost was immediate. Hudson, seizing the opening, slammed into Stephen's exposed side. Claws raked deep, painting crimson stripes across the black fur. Stephen staggered with a pained grunt. "Stephen!" He righted himself, placing himself again between her and Hudson. His sides heaved, blood matting his fur. Hudson circled, his own muzzle smeared with blood, eyes fixed on Josie with terrifying possession. "You see," Hudson snarled, his voice garbled in his wolf's throat. "You can't protect her and fight me. You are not a god, Blackwood. You're a fool who chose a weak human over your pack." The words were a poison dart aimed at Stephen's deepest conflict. Josie saw his ears flatten, a flicker of anguish in his wolfish eyes. He had left his pack. Christopher was down. The line was overrun because of her. The bond between them flooded with his guilt, his resolve, his desperate love. It was a storm inside her, and in that storm something answered. A searing heat erupted from her core, not golden this time, but white-hot. It shot down her limbs into her fingertips. Her vision sharpened, every detail in the ravaged cabin coming into hyperclarity. The grain of the wood, the dust motes dancing in the firelight, the individual hairs on Hudson's raised hackles. A low, resonant hum filled her ears. The sound of the world dialed to a new frequency. If only I had known the power was not a gift but a key, and the lock was my own fear. Her hands, still stinging from the poker's vibration, began to tingle, not with numbness but with potential. The air around them grew heavy, charged. Hudson felt it. His circling stopped. His snarl died in his throat. He took a hesitant step back, his wolf's senses recoiling from the unfamiliar energy radiating from the human girl. Stephen turned his head, his wolf's gaze locking onto Josie. She saw not confusion, but a dawning, awestruck recognition. "Josie!" His voice was a rough whisper in her mind, through the bond. She didn't understand. She only knew the pressure building within her was unbearable, and its target was the wolf who wanted to cage her. She raised her hands, not in surrender, but in instinctive defense. A silent scream built in her soul. Leave him alone. The white-hot energy discharged. It wasn't a bolt of lightning. It was a concussive wave of pure, kinetic force that erupted from her palms. It made no sound, but it hit. Hudson was lifted off his paws and thrown backward as if swatted by a giant's hand. He crashed into the far wall with a sickening thud, slumping to the floor, shifting back into his human form in a dazed heap. Silence again, but this time it was stunned. Josie stared at her hands, trembling violently. Smoke or perhaps steam curled from her fingertips. The heat inside her subsided to a dull, throbbing echo. She felt drained, hollowed out. Stephen shifted. In a blink, the powerful black wolf was gone, replaced by the man, bleeding and bare, but his eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. He didn't look at Hudson. He only looked at her. "Latent," he breathed, taking a step toward her. "Not just a wolf, a gift, a protector's spark." From outside, the sounds of battle, distant snarls and crashes, were suddenly punctuated by new voices. Familiar voices. Shouts of Blackwood. And to the Alpha, Christopher's voice, strained but clear, cut through. "The line is reformed, push them back." Relief, sharp and sweet, flooded the bond. Stephen's head snapped toward the door. The tide was turning. His pack had rallied. A groan came from the corner. Hudson stirred, pushing himself up on one elbow, his face a mask of blood and utter disbelief. He looked at Josie not with desire, but with a kind of terrified reverence. What are you?" Stephen moved between them, his posture declaring the conversation over. "She is the true mate of the Blackwood Alpha, and you are defeated. The Frostfang warriors outside, their Alpha fallen and the Blackwood resistance hardened, began to retreat. The snarls faded into the trees, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the sharp orders of Blackwood warriors securing the area. Christopher appeared in the shattered doorway, his arm in a makeshift sling, his face pale but his jaw set. He took in the scene, the destroyed cabin, the bleeding but standing Alpha, the cowed Hudson, and Josie, standing small and shocked amidst the wreckage with power still lingering in the air around her. "Alpha," Christopher said, his voice thick with loyalty and pain. "The diversion, it was a feint, but we held the main house. When they broke for the woods, we followed. We heard his broadcast." His eyes flicked to Josie. "We came." Stephen gave a single, grave nod. "See to Hudson. Bind him. He will be dealt with under pack law for the breach of territory and the attack on a claimed mate." The sentence was a death knell for Hudson's authority. As Christopher and another warrior moved to secure the fallen Frostfang Alpha, Stephen finally turned fully to Josie. The adrenaline was bleeding away, leaving the grim reality of his wounds and her shock. "Josie," he said, his voice gentling. He reached for her, but she flinched, staring at her hands. I did that." "You protected your mate," he said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. "The bond doesn't just awaken the wolf. It awakens the soul. Your power, it's part of you, part of us." He swayed on his feet then, the blood loss taking its toll. Josie's fear for herself vanished, swamped by a tidal wave of fear for him. The bond screamed at his weakness. She rushed forward, catching him before he could fall, her small frame struggling to support his weight. "I've got you," she whispered, echoing his words from the forest a lifetime ago. "I've got you." He leaned into her, his head resting against hers. "I know." The return to the Blackwood pack house was a somber victory procession. The Frostfang forces were in full retreat, their Alpha a prisoner. The cost was written in the blood on the snow, and the weary faces of the Blackwood warriors. Mara, the healer, was waiting in the great room, which had been converted into a makeshift infirmary. She worked on Stephen's wounds with brisk efficiency, her eyes widening slightly at the depth of the gashes, but offering no comment. Josie refused to leave his side, sitting on a stool beside the cot, her hand wrapped around his. The pack moved around them, casting glances filled with a new, wary respect. They had seen the aftermath of the cabin. They had felt the strange, powerful surge of energy. The story of the human girl who had blasted an alpha wolf across a room with her bare hands was already spreading in hushed tones. Victoria, from her cell somewhere below, must have heard it too. Josie found she couldn't muster hatred for her anymore, only a distant pity. Victoria had fought for her pack, for her Alpha, in the only way she knew. She had been wrong, lethally so, but her fear was now obsolete. Josie was no longer a helpless human liability. She was something else. Once Stephen was stitched and bandaged, he insisted on standing. He was weak, but his presence was absolute. He called the pack to order in the great room. Every member who could stand gathered, their eyes fixed on their Alpha and the small, pale woman beside him. "The Frostfang Pack is broken," Stephen announced, his voice carrying without strain. "Their alpha is our prisoner. Their treaty with the human businessman Miller is void." He looked at Josie, his gaze softening for all to see. "A new treaty is forged today, not of business, but of blood and bond. This woman, Josie Miller, is my true mate, the moon's own choice. She is not human-born to our world, but she is of it. Today, she defended her alpha and her pack with a power that puts lies to any claim of weakness." He paused, letting his words sink in. The silence was no longer hostile, but charged with awe and acceptance. "She is Blackwood," Stephen declared, his final word ringing like a verdict. "And any who challenge her challenge me." It was not a request. It was law. The pack, as one, bowed their heads, not just to him, but to her. The submission washed over Josie, a physical sensation of tension dissolving. She was not just accepted, she was recognized. Later, in the quiet of Stephen's bedroom, their bedroom now, the world finally stilled. The fire was lit. The door was locked. They were alone with the aftermath and each other. Stephen sat on the edge of the bed, and Josie knelt before him, carefully applying salve to the smaller cuts on his arms and chest. Her touch was feather-light, her brow furrowed in concentration. "My father," she said quietly, the first time she'd spoken of him since the forest. "The treaty is over," Stephen said, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "He has no hold on you, not legally, not spiritually. You belong here with me if you choose." She looked up, meeting his eyes. The storm gray was calm now, full of a quiet certainty. The bond between them was a steady, warm glow, no longer a terrifying mystery but a comforting constant. It was a connection, not a chain. "I have no pack," she whispered. "No family, not anymore." "You are wrong," he said, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "You have a pack that now looks to you with respect. You have a beta who would lay down his life for you because you are part of me. And you have a mate." He leaned forward, his forehead touching hers, his breath mingling with hers. "A mate who loves you, not because a bond forced him to, but because the bond led him to the bravest, most infuriating, most powerful woman he has ever known." The words unlocked the last frozen chamber of her heart. A sob escaped her, but it was followed by a smile, tremulous and real. She believed him. She chose him. The kiss was not like the first, born of claiming and chaos. It was slow, deep, a promise and a welcome. It tasted of healing and home. When they parted, the world had rearranged itself. The fear was gone. In its place was a future. Weeks later, the scars on her feet had faded to silver lines. The scars on his side were healing into fierce, proud marks. Josie walked through the Blackwood forest, not in flight, but in belonging. The trees knew her scent now. The pack knew her name. She stood at the edge of a clearing, watching Stephen train with his warriors. His strength returned, his authority unquestioned. Christopher stood beside him, his arm healed, offering a dry comment that made Stephen bark a laugh. Victoria had been exiled, banished to wander without a pack. A fate worse than death for a wolf. Justice had been served. Hudson awaited judgment, his fate to be decided in council with neighboring alphas. His power was broken. As the sun dappled through the pines, Josie felt the familiar, golden warmth stir within her. It was a part of her now, as natural as breathing. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the pack, her pack, the wind in the trees, and the steady, unwavering pulse of the bond that tied her soul to the alpha who had captured her on her wedding day, and in doing so had set her free. She was Josie of Blackwood, mate, protector, home.